Respected Savinama and esteemed scholars, participant friends. Today what I am going to do is to trace the state of Indian philosophy today by making or tracing it from the tradition through continuity and participation. The traditional Indian philosophy is a corpus of, is not coming. Okay. I think it has come. Philosophical doctrines that has been current in India for at least 2000 years or more in Indian subcontinent. This was communicated through Sanskrit language from generation to generation. The beauty of the tradition is that it was a perfectly living, widespread study among Indian philosophers till only the other day, probably the advent of the British, till the advent of the British. My presentation today will deal with the continuity in and participation with the traditional learning in India and how Indian mind was lost its basic creativity due to lack of proper participation in traditional learning. Friends, it was one of the main reasons why I thought we should have a place like Artha Vidya Kendra, which can really give some impetus to promote traditional learning. The first part of my presentation will deal with the concepts and debates in the traditional learning, and second part will deal with the colonial intervention that has brought about a total degeneration of ideas and the challenges we face to trace our way back to where we were. I would like to discuss as to what accounts or what was the reason for the decline of the study and participation in Indian philosophy. First, for any philosophical tradition to continue and grow, there should be participation to deliberate, debate and support and contest the prevalent views. This part was missing, which was not happening during the Mughal Sultanate. This was one of the problematics. Like what I want to say is it was happening during this happened during the British period, which was not happening during the Islamic India. That the debate and analysis from the line of Indian thinking was largely exemplified in the fundamental texts like Upanishads, and which contain dialogues and debates between Shvetaketu, Aruni, Narada, Sanat Kumar, Gargi, Maitreyi, Janaka and Yajnavalkya. Why I want to bring this point here is to just answer a question of the West, starting from Hegel onwards. Those who say that the Indian tradition died because of non-questioning attitude. But that was not how it was formed. All the while there have been having the questioning attitude. The original texts of the Upanishads, the Vedas themselves have these dialogues. Even the Buddha, as we find the Pali literature, invites Brahmins from Varanasi by sitting just outskirts of the Brahminical domain, Brahminical territory of Varanasi. Buddha invites people from Sarnath and talks with them, where he gave his fast discourse, even to debate on some concepts to find out or reach at the consensus or conclusions. The same analytical heat was maintained between the orthodox and heterodox schools. Like it happened till 9th century, like unabatingly, continuously it was happening till Asanga, Vasubandhu, two brothers came in Buddhism, and all that has happened. It was not very rare when a system builder could not only put up his own views, but also put up the possible objections against his own standpoint, but also present the opponent's point of view more ably and effectively than the opponents themselves. You know, that is what Shankara does in the Tarkapada. And Simanena, Paramata Vidveshakarena, he says, Tathapi Mahajana Paragruhitani, Sankhyaza Tantrani, he says that people might think that those Tantra means philosophy. are great, therefore they should not be swayed by them, therefore in order to bring them back to the mainstream I am writing this Tarkapada, otherwise I don't have any desire to refute their views. That's what he writes, but he ultimately refutes them. Put up the possible objections against his own standpoint. And that is another thing you can find in Ramanuja's Mahapurvapaksha. The way he puts up the Advaitins view is extraordinary ability Ramanuja shows in putting up the Advaitins view. How beautifully he says, he gives the Shankara's view. Shankara, Vasaspati Mishra, Ramanuja were the illustrious example of this presentation of Purvapaksha. These debates, which form the central core lifeline of the philosophical activity, is no longer in vogue. It is not no more happening in India. This needs to be analyzed with the internal and external factors responsible for this. One part of my presentation would be this. I have collected a lot of views and my own views, and second part I will show how it was going on. Logic developed in India from the tradition of Vada Vidya. The Vada Vidya has been the core of logical thinking in the country. A discipline dealing with the categories of debate over the religious, philosophical, moral and doctrinal issues. These are meant to learn how to conduct debates successfully. Akshapada Gautama have given a very systematic presentation of the types of debate, like an honest debate, Vada, a tricky debate, Jalpa, and a destructive debate, Vitanda, mean to demolish the views of the opponents somehow. These type of debates are employed between teachers and students. The second and third types are meant to engage with the opponents. A little later, I will take up to a concept and show how there is conceptual continuity and participation in Indian philosophical schools. One of the reasons for such a state of deterioration is the indomitable presence of Western philosophy and severity of its impact on Indian philosophy. The modern Indian teachers and students totally accepted Western thinking and recognized that most of the Western ideas, which was intelligible in terms of Western ideas, the rest was rejected as dogmatic, trivial, and romantic speculations. I will come to show one or two examples of this little later. The old type of traditional scholars lived in a self-contained world of their own and do not care to communicate with others except in their own limited world. This was what was happening even in the olden days. Like suppose you belong to one school, you don't go to interact with others. This was happening in the Middle Ages. Not at the time like 8th, 9th century, this was not scenario. After that I am talking about. As Kalidas Bhattacharya says, that the same type of thinking again and again is what was happening, and that was happening in the, he was telling that it is a false patriotism. That is what I was telling just now. Then in later criticism of Maya Avidya, on which I have just completing a book, you find the same type of refutations are repeated in by many people. Like Baladev Vidya Bhushan in his Siddhanta Ratna, all the Goswamis, they try to do away with Maya Vidya, and they have employed the same logic as Ramanuja has done. There is nothing, that is what Bhattacharya says, that it is false patriotism and harmful nostalgia. The Pandits are not only ignorant of the other systems, so why this happened? Because of non-participation in the systems. And the non-participation in the systems happened a long time back also. The Pandits are not only ignorant of the other systems and the new ideas from outside, but also ignorant about their own system. That is what Dasgupta was telling. Especially of the heterodox systems. Many people don't criticize the Buddhist and Jaina schools at all. They are content by refuting their own heterodox schools. They think that it is a sin to dialogue with the heterodox systems. Indian philosophy thus moved in a closed circle. There was improvements in style, but not in content and substance. That is Raju. Thus, we see the internal reasons that have more to contribute towards the decay of Indian philosophy than the external reasons. Dasgupta was of the opinion that what has happened to the traditional learning was inevitable, but still Indian philosophy can live on meaningfully by transcending the colonial impacts. He says, the torrents, very important statement the Asutta gives, shows his scholarship. How a great scholar in Sanskrit. How much he was, you can see the boundary of his thinking, always went beyond the Sanskrit learning. The torrents that were coming are not merely a passing inundation. They indicate a rise of water which has come to stay and increase. If we try to hold fast to our old bedrock and turn a deaf ear to the roaring rocks, we are bound to be drowned and suffocated. We would rather be washed away or clutch at a floating in rafter and save ourselves than hold fast to the submerged rock, not to allow ourselves to be washed away, but to build an edifice of our own high and secure enough to withstand the ravages of all inundations. We want to avail ourselves of all that come floating to us and enjoy them at our home. Let the waters of the western sea come and breathe themselves on the walls of our fortresses with their foaming billows. Our only safety is thus to be with the sea and yet above it. A very important statement. He says we can accommodate, but still we can transcend it. And note the balancing both the types can be done thinking in terms of unity in philosophy. That is what was happening by the modern thinkers, contemporary Indian philosophers, and this tendency, the tendency of understanding India in Western terms and West in terms of Indian thought has become very important in the contemporary Indian thinking. In contemporary period, all philosophers carry that trait for unity with them. The work of understanding, Pitirazu says, and interpreting Western thought in terms of the Indian and Indian in terms of the Western became therefore very important, and educated Indians who felt a responsibility to their own culture and spiritual life thought that such a task was an important necessity. Thus, there was an acceptance for a few of the British while making a case for Indian thought. Sri Aurobindo, on the other hand, thinks that the Indian self, that is the soul, Atma, came out unscathed, though the body was totally damaged. The Indian brain is still in potentially what it was, but it is being damaged, stunted and defaced. The greatness of its innate possibility is hidden by the greatness of its surface deterioration. I still do not understand what he says exactly, but still I feel that he is very pessimistic to the fact that Indian philosophy is not what it was the other day, what it was in the past, and he says the surface deterioration is so much that it is very difficult to bring back what we had earlier. Thus, there is an acceptance for a few of the British while making a case for the Indian thought. Sri Aurobindo, on the other hand, thinks that Indian soul came out unscathed. Though the body was badly damaged, the Indian brain is still potentially what it was, but as I have already given the quotation, being stunted and defaced. In contrast, there are thinkers according to whom Indian philosophy, thus the Indian mind, was badly destroyed by colonial intervention. That statement speaks of total liquidation of Indian philosophy, remaining as a dead and mummified subject. There was, what is happening? What is it? Presenter. Okay. Oh, that's it. There are other scholars who view that Indian philosophy is not destroyed but captured. A British thinker, Dummett, thinks that the Indian thinking was blanketed, according to him, because of the massive impact of Western political hegemony and cultural imperialism. The creativity is gone, though it is simply alive. The conceptual problematic, even though it is difficult to catch the heart of Indian philosophical tradition, usually quite a number of schools are associated with. This is another problematic I want to bring out, one slide was missing, therefore it did not come out properly. Schools are associated with karma. See, this is what Godabarisha says, that Indian philosophy went through a few dogmas. The dogmas were the theory of rebirth, karma, mukti, and the scriptural authority. Sabda Pramana are mere dogmas. And Kalidas Bhattacharya, one of his brilliant essays, has refuted all these things that Professor Godabarisha presents as dogmas. There are three ways we will be able to reconstruct philosophy in India. First, this is the type of philosophy that Devi Prasad Chattopadhyaya presents, the materialism as the only living component of Indian spiritualism. The two, that is Devi Prasad Chattopadhyaya. Spiritualism is central to Indian thought, which is championed by Radhakrishnan, Ranade, T.N.P. Mahadevan, Ramachandra Gandhi. Third, Motilal and Godabarish's view that rationalism is core of Indian thinking. Radhakrishnan views that it is the spiritual life that dominates Indian thinking. And Motilal and Godabarishna emphasize the rigor of Nyaya system. They criticize the views of Jenner, who alleged that the Indian mysticism lacked the logical rigor. Here I want to put a footnote saying, for correction and your consideration, that India never had a mysticism. If you say Indian thinking had a mysticism, you are imposing something from the west to the east. The mystical thinking is only a Christian Eurocentric thinking, came out of the epistemology that they did. We did not have our whole philosophizing was based on darsana, which I will be coming little later, and based on sakshatkara, sakshat pratiti. There is no question of mysticism here at all. If something is mystical to another person who has not seen the truth, it is his mistake. That is not the mistake of the person who has seen and who is speaking. It is just not having a proper spectacle to see the things. That does not mean a thing in front of you is mystical. It is all the more because of the geographical limitation that the West always suffered. They criticize the views of the Jenner, who allege that the Indian mysticism lacks the logical rigor. As I told you, I don't believe in anything called mysticism in India. Motilal cited Nagarjuna and Sriharsa to say the rigor that has gone into building up the Indian thinking. Godabarishna criticizes the view of Potter, who says that moksha is what Indian philosophy teaches. Godabarishna viewed that there is no difference in doing philosophy in the East as different from that of the West. J.N. Mohanty, I want to bring him here, one of the very senior, so to say, profound scholars of the world today. He, and a person who knows East and West equally well, he says, he contests the views of Radhakrishnan and says, the Western mind lays great stress on science, logic and humanism. For the Hindus, a system of philosophy is an insight. A darsana, this is here he puts darsana. It is a vision of truth and not a matter of logical argument and proof. There have been such debates among the philosophers, which is an example of the interaction between traditional Indian philosophy and the modern Western analytical philosophy. I am talking of the scenario like in the contemporary scenario now what is happening, because there are also a few participants in this debate alive today, like Professor Mohanty, and those who are reading and working and debating on that tradition. So that is what is happening is we are trying to see the Indian philosophy in the mirror, in the glass, or in the spectacle of Western philosophical analytical philosophy. That is what is happening. The complexity concerning the rationality of explanations. So that is what is the rationality, the proposition by Motilal and Krishna and Motilal. Yeah. No, not Motilal and Krishna, correct. So the complexity concerning the rationality of explanations gets compounded by the complexity of reason itself as a human faculty and the complex ways in which it may be put to use. See, the whole problem is whether you say Indian philosophy as darsana or in some other word. If you put some other word, what would be that word? The Motilal says that the best word for Indian philosophy as it is done is anvichiki, where rationality and reason predominate than the perception or vision that which Mahant is talking about. The framework of reason can be seen as extended or delimited in such diverse ways and directions that what is admitted as rational in one scheme can be questioned or even ruled out in another scheme. See, the rationality is rational? Is the rationality in rationality itself is a question. This is not so much of an indication of the relativity of rationality as it is of its open structure. The open structure is limited by one factor, that is self-contradiction. That is what has been happening in. See, from here what I am doing in a different methodology that I am talking, going backward, trying to see from here what was happening earlier. And this part of my presentation would be to see back how it is framed. It is not just a dichotomy between Western philosophy and Indian philosophy or Hindu philosophy and bringing the framework and working in one model, but rather it is working in our own model to understand our own systems. Whatever is the framework of reason, self-contradiction cannot be allowed within it as a possibility. That is what was happening. What was happening. Anything except self-contradiction is logically possible, and reason is entitled to operate using any or all those infinite possibilities, examine their tenability, and uphold any of them. In this way, reason is not limited to operating only within those possibilities that are actually realized or are perceived to be potentially realizable within the sphere of actual human experience. One point that clearly emerges from the above is that though the philosopher's explanations have everything to do with the world of our experience, yet the source of their validity and acceptability lies entirely outside the experience and within the realm of reason and reason alone. A philosophical explanation or a theory can be regarded as unsound or unjustified only on rational or logical grounds, and not at all on the grounds that it is either unsupported by everyday experiences or even contrary to them. Experience is the ultimate testing ground only for scientific theories and explanations. Even when new scientific theories and explanations are offered only on grounds of logic and reason to start with as hypotheses, they will never be fully accepted by the entire scientific community unless they are also validated by appropriate experiments and observable experiential data structures. See, that is how the science is developed. I am just giving a brief introduction to show the difference between science and philosophy that was done here in India. In some way it has some scientific background, since philosophers can and some of them can do question the validity or correctness of our everyday experience itself. Appealing to such experience for validation of any or all philosophical explanation would surely become incongruous and absurd. The philosophical thinking in India proceeded on very considerably different lines right from the beginning, of doing philosophy. Professor Hiriana, has reflected on this, saying that while philosophy in ancient Greek originated in a sense of wonder, it originated as a result of the efforts of man to understand the presence of sorrow and also preeminently overcome it. It is difficult to disagree with this conjecture because there are very many places where the basic sheer sense of wonder gets expressed very vividly, and even the later Upanishadic period, the question of the philosophers about the origin of the universe are strikingly similar to the ancient Greek questions. Later on, Socrates turned the torch of philosophical inquiry to the man and himself in ancient Greece. He is famous for his statement, "Know thyself." Correspondingly, there was also an Upanishadic inquiry into the Atman, the inner essence of man, and the cryptic recommendation, Atmanam Vidhi. In spite of these very strong and deep similarities, the two traditions developed along completely different lines. Therefore, the importance attached to the phenomenon of human sorrow and its removal seems to have played a major role in Indian philosophy, taking it in a completely different direction of development. There seem to be good reasons why it happened and that way, but we will not digress into here and take it little later on. The Greek philosopher started off by asking the question, what is the stuff out of which all these things are made? And the question asked by the Indian philosopher was, by knowing what, everything in the universe can be known. Kasminno bhagavo vidyate sarvavidam vidyatam bhavati. Hence, the attaching of very high value to the knowledge of the self and the things as they really are is indicated by designing such knowledge of higher knowledge, designing such knowledge as higher knowledge. While commenting on the Gautama's Nyaya Sutra, Vachayana says, knowing the things as they really are is Tattva Jnana. The term Tattva Jnana in Sanskrit is a Sanskrit word for what is called a philosophy in the West. Another thing that I am bringing in here, that is according to Motilal. Motilal was not thought in this line. I am just analyzing his things in my own way. One who has Tattva Jnana is no more ignorant and therefore no more absent in ignorance, thus ceasing to bind himself to worldly existence. In the Indian tradition, philosophy is also designated by the term darsana, as I have told you, because to start with, it is a sort of intellectual vision of reality, as it is with a person, not which a person attempts through study and reflection, and subsequently it culminates in a real vision of the ultimate reality in its true form. The real vision is the liberation of the individual from the worldly bonds, and nothing else remains to be achieved after attaining such a vision. See, the epistemology is now related, connected to the axiology. The sole purpose of philosophy is to enable us to attain the final vision. Since Western philosophy usually went wherever free reason took them, and were also looking for absolutely certain knowledge or for necessary truths about the world, they developed a wide variety of philosophical systems, usually no common focus or purpose underlying them all. Each philosopher tried to explain the universe of our experience in his own way. On the other hand, the source of correct knowledge, in order to avoid wrong knowledge or ignorance, and the desire for reaching the highest goal with its help, made almost all Indian philosophers look in a single definite direction and also philosophizing with a unified purpose. Therefore, the Indian philosophical schools, although extremely diverse in character, still follow a much more predictable common pattern which, compared to the diverse patterns discernible to the systems of Western philosophy. Yet, another unique feature of Indian philosophical schools is the complete absence of antagonism between philosophy and religion. In fact, some of these systems are themselves religions. In the West, philosophy came into very sharp conflict with religion, and eventually both philosophy and science separated from religion. That separation occurred largely because the investigation of the scientists into physical nature using pre-reason combined with observation and experiments suggested truths about nature that were completely opposed to what was said in the Holy Scriptures. I don't translate Vedas and Upanishads as scriptures because scriptures have different connotations, and I put only Upanishads as Upanishads, or you can put as Shruti. The trouble Galileo had with the church is well known. This kind of conflict never arose in India because of several reasons. The distinction between higher and lower knowledge served as a kind of safety valve, because all knowledge about physical nature, in which alone the scientists were interested, belonged to the lower kind of knowledge in which the philosophers and men of religion were never interested. The Indian astronomers who gave a scientific explanation of the eclipses of the sun and the moon were never persecuted, despite the widespread religious belief that the eclipses occurred when the demon Rahu made ever unsuccessful attempts to swallow up the sun and the moon. Now the question of God. This is one part. Another part. There are 6 orthodox schools of Indian philosophy, all these schools, and of these Nyaya had no place for God until Udayana brought him in as a much later stage. Even then, God was no creator of the universe but only presided over its functioning according to the law of karma. Karma Adhyaksha. Vaisheshika school, which advocated an elaborate theory of atoms, also did not have God in its philosophizing. Though epic Samkhya found in the Mahabharata was theistic, when it appeared in the systematic form, it has no place for God at all. Yoga accommodated God as a non-obligatory and a purely alternative model for the practice of concentration by a beginner. Purva is clearly atheistic, and some of its proponents have even argued against the existence of God. In the standard version of Advaita, which is the first among the systematic schools of Vedanta, God is also an appearance. It is only in the next schools of Vedanta, which was founded by Ramanuja and others, the God comes to occupy for the very first time a central place in the world view of philosophers. All this story building is ultimately grounded on everybody's everyday life and culture of the people among whom the philosophers live, and the common customs and belief structures they share in the society of the day. Therefore, it is not at all surprising that the answers they give to questions and the systems they build happen to be different from society to society, culture to culture, religion to religion, and from time to time. It is also equally unsurprising if within the same society theories once held came to be rejected as later generation. In this way, dozens of systems get built up at different times in different societies. That is what has happened in Nyaya. You have different types of Nyaya coming from like Gautam until the recent times. The Indian philosophers are able to accommodate the notions of correct as well as wrong knowledge by entertaining a very neutral notion of cognition. That is what is Rupaji is going to present on Khyati. This cognition is most commonly referred to by the Sanskrit term pramana, which is unfortunately translated into English as knowledge. There are also other less common terms like buddhi, which must also be translated as cognition and not as knowledge. There are various kinds of cognitions, and knowledge is only one of them. That is, there are cognition that do not at all amount to knowledge proper. For example, doubt samsaya is certainly a kind of mental state, but it is not knowledge about a certain object at a distance if doubt whether it is a man or a tree trunk, this doubt does not amount to any kind of knowledge about the object. Similarly, sleep is regarded as another kind of mental state, but it is also not knowledge. Thus, all knowledge is definitely a type of cognition, of which correct and wrong knowledge are important subtypes, but all cognitions do not constitute knowledge. In all Indian philosophical schools, except the materialists, the highest value, I am just going, first I gave an example of the continuity and participation in metaphysics, second is epistemology. Now I come to the value. The highest value is attached to the removal of the metaphysical ignorance by the attainment of the higher knowledge. So attainment is considered the highest possible goal of all human life and is variously described as moksha, nirvana, kaivalya, audasinya and so on. There is no parallel between attaining correct knowledge of the everyday kind and correct knowledge of the metaphysical kind. All this is peculiar to Indian philosophical systems, and we do not find any notion of higher lower ignorance admitted or developed in Western systems, and consequently the contrasting conception of higher lower knowledge is also absent. When Western philosophers totally dismissed all knowledge that was wrong, the Indian philosophers make serious inquiries into the conditions that led one to wrong knowledge, aprama or brahma. This was because wrong knowledge was something that has to be avoided at all costs, since it caused bondage and prevented one from attaining moksha. It is also a fact that only when one can clearly recognize error, he can grasp the truth. If one does not know what error is, it is possible for him to mistake some error for truth and thus remain continuously ignorant bound with no chance of moksha or liberation. Thus, correct knowledge must be consciously pursued and attained. If such knowledge is attainable, surely there must be well recognized methods of attaining right knowledge. We must first look for such methods in Indian philosophy. Such methods or means are called as pramana. Pramana in the way or method of attaining correct and valid knowledge. The number of pramanas accepted in Indian philosophers vary from school to school. I have already told you that all of you know about this particular problematic. I am not going in detail. Whether such additional sources may be accepted is a point highly debated in Indian epistemology. Those who argue that for additional sources of knowledge like comparison, presumption, etc., do so on the ground that each means of knowledge is capable of grasping only certain limited type of objects. Like nose can grasp, this is what is called as pramana vyavastha. I am not, I have written about all these things in my full paper. This argument that the pramana form a graded or scaled hierarchical series whose objects do not overlap is called pramana vyavastha. According to this view, there is a one-to-one relationship between the pramana and the respective objects. There are others who object to such multiplication of the means of pramanas as well as the different kinds of objects of knowledge. All those who accept more than 3 pramanas are accused of not practicing conceptual economy, parsimony, what we say, of their acts of formulating a theory of pramana. This group argues that some kind of objects can be known by more than one means of knowledge. For example, the presence of fire on a distant mountain can be known by inference, its presence there by seeing and the emerging smoke, and also through direct perception by going there and seeing the fire. This belief that objects can be known by more than one means of knowledge is called intermingling of the means of knowledge or pramana samplava. This view allows for the existence of a large variety of different kinds of things without insisting on a large number of different views of knowing those things. I am bringing this to show the grounds of debate, grounds of continuity. There are reasons why one of the above views is preferred over another by different philosophers. For example, the Buddhists believe that whatever can be known through either perception or inference, and therefore argue that even the authority of the Buddha need not be accepted in any matter. The Buddha himself has told his followers repeatedly not to just accept his words, but to check out their truth first by their own experience and thinking. That is what Vichavo Natu Gaurava, Pariksha Vichavo Graya. So hence, the Buddhists upheld Pramana Vyavastha Vada of the strictest kind. According to them, what is knowable through perception is never knowable also through inference, and what is knowable through inference cannot be known through perception. The Mimamsakas also upheld Pramana Vyavastha, but for a different reason. They argue that the practice of dharma, which is taught by the Vedas, is most important for every human being to attain the highest good. They say that we can know what is dharma only through the Vedas, which are the only and exclusive source of our knowledge concerning it. We cannot get knowledge concerning dharma through any other means of knowledge. Therefore, they argue that each pramana reigns over an exclusive kind of object, and that pramana alone is exclusive and authoritative source of our knowledge concerning such subjects, like none is the sole and exclusive authority on the matter concerning smell. So, while the upholders of Pramana Vyavastha tend to recognize a qualitative distinction between two pieces of knowledge of the same object, which are obtained by different means, the champions of Pramana Samplava argue that insofar as a piece of knowledge concerns the very same object, whether that knowledge is obtained by one means or another means does not matter at all. For example, our knowledge of fire is still knowledge of fire only, whether we have got that knowledge through direct perception or inferred its existence by perceiving smoke, which is a sign of the existence of fire, or got the knowledge entirely on the authority of a reliable person who has seen the fire. The debate about the Pramana Vyavastha and Pramana Samprava is largely due to the initial interest of only those Indian philosophers who are seriously concerned about protecting the authoritativeness of Vedic texts as the sole source of our knowledge of Dharma. Some of the Mimamsakas were so concerned about this that they even denied the validity of the well-respected idea of yogic perception. They say yogic pratyekta is not right pratyekta, in which things not ordinarily perceived, like what lies in the future or what has happened in the previous birth, were said to be directly perceived by the yogis. The advocates of Pramana Samprava Vada have maintained that the same object can be known by one means or through varying combination of few different means, and that is what is happening. Just because there is a difference between just seeing an object and also touching that object, it does not also necessitate making a distinction between seen rough texture and felt rough texture, as though the two textures are two entities of different objects. The advocates of Pramana Samprava also maintain that the idea of different means involved in our knowledge of different kinds of objects must be employed with great care. If it is not done so, we may be forced to admit a separate Pramana for our knowledge of each individual object. There are some kind of objects knowable through different means of combination or different means. There may be a few other objects not knowable through multiple means. It is only in the case of latter kind of objects that postulating a separate Pramana on account of for their knowledge is justified. The debate about knowledge also have involved several other questions. One of them is whether knowledge does or does not have an object. From a Western standpoint, this question may look very odd, but it is not so from an Indian standpoint. Most of the Indian systems have introduced a distinction in knowledge into higher and lower knowledge. This practice goes back to the Upanishadic period. The Upanishadic thinkers think that the knowledge which brings about moksha, or the final release from cycle of birth and death, alone is the higher knowledge. All other knowledge is lower knowledge. Higher knowledge has its subjects for Indian philosophers. In exactly same way, lower knowledge has its own objects, except for the Charvakas, who does not admit higher knowledge of any kind, and also for the Sunyavadins, for whom there are no objects at all. In brief, the Indian philosophers most seriously pursued right knowledge, because it ensured the correct knowledge of the ultimate reality, and such knowledge also always brought about the realization of the highest of values in life. The systematic integration of pursuit of knowledge, reality and values is typical of all schools of Indian philosophy. Such integration results in a complete vision, darsana. I come back to my old proposition, hypothesis of the whole, and also the place of that individual in it. Therefore, in its very rightly called a vision. The history of Indian philosophy shows that there is a very deep and tight relationship between the theories of knowledge and theories of reality, and all the debates, dialogues have gone around these two things. Therefore, the specific features of the theory of knowledge are a necessary link to the specific details of the theory of reality. In view of this, whoever is averse to the specific theory of reality is also seen to be averse to the specific concepts and doctrines in that theory of knowledge. Conversely, whoever is averse to the certain ideas and doctrine in the theory of knowledge finally ends up rejecting certain specific theories of reality. A theory of conduct coming to the values invariably accompanies both the theories of knowledge and theories of reality. This connection exists possibly because reality requires a certain way of perceiving it, and since this way of perceiving is not natural to anyone, being because of metaphysical ignorance or ajnana, one has to be cultivated the necessity, temperament and outlook which is conducive to perceiving truth, perceiving it rightly. Otherwise, one will continue to perceive wrongly, which is the original or natural way for all beings. Unless certain ways of behaving in the world and in everybody's life becomes effortlessly natural, no one ends up at the doorstep of reality as it is and has its vision, darsana. One has how one lives all the time in the world very much determines where he finally ends up. Therefore, proper conduct, dharma, is the only solid foundation on which one may begin the search for ultimate reality and final goal of life. I bring in this conception of dharma to show there has been a lot of dialogue and discussion, debate about the concept of dharma and what the dharma is. Dharma Shastra talks give large number of prescriptions about dharma. That is how several issues concerning knowledge, reality and values get linked up inevitably in certain determinate ways, and philosophy as a discipline also comes to acquire its own distinctive purpose and use. Therefore, philosophical activity is not at all purposeless or without benefit. In fact, purpose and benefit lie in the very core of nearly everything that humans do, and one sage of India observed centuries ago, even the dullest person does not move himself into action without a purpose or benefit in view. Prayojanam anuddishya mandopi na pravartate. I do not want to drag on keeping you captive here. This is how all systems of Indian philosophy have been designed: Dharma Shastra, Artha Shastra, Saundarya Shastra, aesthetics, in which there is a large dialogue as to what is the essence of the Kavya. We are having the same format, the tradition of reputation and decoration, Khandana and Mandana, and I do not know if it would be possible for us to not look back but to look at ourselves before it is too late. Thank you. I hope I was it was understood. If you have any questions, you can always ask. And the light came. Put on the light. Yes.
When you say that the questioning attitude was not there in Indian philosophical system, or it was there, actually it was not there, because that Shraddha is always there. So when Shvetakatu asked Udalaka, Tell me more, tell me more. So already he has established that there is such a thing, knowing which everything can be known. And after that 7 times when he asks, or 9 times, then it is only Shraddha is already there and knowledge is imparted. The same thing is Gargi's with Yagyavalkya was very aggressive. But if you take Bhrigu, where you are reading, so when Bhrigu goes to his father also, and that dialogue also, already because the student is willing to learn. So it is not, that questioning thing is not exactly what the Western they ask, the questioning mind, it is Eva. It is like this, like Arjuna asked to?
No.
Eva.
Like a jigyasa. It's a hermeneutical.
Jigyasa means already Shraddha is there.
Yeah.
That big thing Shraddha is not there. It is very aggressive in, they won't look at, say, what is my objective to knowledge? They will just ask like that. So, we have to say that such a question was not there unless it is a, not even samvada, unless it is a vada.
No, this problem is there in the Greece also. Like when the people are coming around Socrates in the Greece, they are coming out of Shraddha only. They are questioning.
No, people like Plato and all, they were willing to learn from Socrates or Aristotle was willing to learn from Plato.
That willingness. Willingness is Shraddha. No, that is another type of questioning. There are 2 types of questioning. Questioning with Shraddha.
The type of questioning and that type of questioning is different.
No. When Prachina Nayakas are asked questions, they could not answer.
Who?
Naya. I am telling you about Naya.
Who asked whom?
Like the questions, many questions are asked by the Navina Nayakas to the Prachina. Like in between there are some people like Khandana Khandakatyakara, Sriyas. Ask question to Naya school. Naya school is not able to answer. There is no answer in the Naya school.
That is how they develop knowledge.
Just a minute. So that is not out of jigyasa.
That is to hold your skills.
That is what I am telling. The whole continuity and participation are of 2 types. One is by agreeing, another is disagreeing. One is agreeing type is by a hermeneutical proposition, jigyasa. Not karma jigyasa, but karma jigyasa.
Tell me more, I want to know details.
And details. Like Janata Yagyavalkya Samvada is the first variety of such a, with the agreement. But the disagreement debate is also very large. Shankara is questioning all those people. How is Prakriti? Get my point?
Can I say? When Shankara puts up a Puravaksha, it is designed. There is really no real Puravaksha in front of him. Really? No.
Why?
No. I'm telling.
Why ever?
No, because he is being able to answer. We don't know if there is a debate and it is like hung, then we will know. But he puts up, he wants to say something, some clarification, so he puts up a Puravaksha. So it is. But suppose you go out of your arena, what is the question we don't know? Shankara, going through Shankara's Bhashyam does not prepare you to handle Vishishtadvaita Advaita, or a Christian, or a Muslim, or a atheist, or a agnostic. We are not prepared. So unless you have totally Shankara's under your belt and you know about what is the fallacy in the other system as well as Western, it is not possible to handle. They will throw broken soda bottles at people. And all of the Mahatmas, they are operating within a very, very
limited world.
Yes. Already Shraddha is there, Padmaja is there, this is there, that is there.
We are not talking about that. The whole thing is how the tradition was continuous because of participation. What is the participation? Participation in agreement and participation in disagreement. So this question of Shankara's Tarkapada is the question of participation in disagreement. You get my point? And you may say...
You would have handled the 5 schools, the 5 other schools, if we can call them schools. And Baki Jalapa and the 4 schools of Jainism and 4 schools of Buddhism. But again, he wants to say something, so there is a Puravaksha. So that he can bring in his Siddhanta.
Yeah.
That's the we are in a very aggressive move. ନିଜ କଥା କହୁଛି, we are in a ଲୋକମାନଙ୍କର ଇଏ thinking and logical ability ଇଏ ହେଇଗଲାଣି। ଗୋଟେ ଆପଣ ଧର IIT ରେ ଗୋଟେ ଏମିତି କହିବେ ପ୍ରେଜେଣ୍ଟ କରିବେ, ଏମିତି ଚୁପଚାପ ହେଇକି ବସିବେନି, କିଏ ଗୋଟେ ସେଠି ପଚାରିବ, କିଏ ଗୋଟେ ସେଠି ପଚାରିବ।
In our things this happens.
Because
we are very little class.
Having them since last 2 years in the open net rate. So whatever I have not learned in the Gurukulam or university, just 2 years soda bottle खाई I know how.
No, but like it is okay. Soda bottle खाया is nothing bad. We are asking for that only. We are prepared for that. When we are proposing a philosopher, see that is not what is happening. The of late, the questioning is so.
Before asking questions, at least one school, again I don't accept Vedanta as a school. 1 year one should have under the belt, then only others. That takes a long time. 12 ବର୍ଷ ଲାଗିଯିବ ଗୋଟେ।
ନାଇଁ 12 ବର୍ଷ ଲାଗିବ 20 ବର୍ଷ ଲାଗିବ। That is not a question. No. Western philosophy ଛାଡ଼ି ଦିଅନ୍ତୁ। I am just bringing Western philosophy as a ପୂର୍ବ ପକ୍ଷ। I am bringing Western philosophy as a model. I just to bring now what is happening today. See, when we are talking about continuity and participation, we have to talk from today. And today you cannot talk without English. If you have to talk in English, you have to bring them because they have already come into your arena. They have occupied.
They know more than what.
Exactly. Therefore, their understanding and your understanding must match. And now when we match, like where are we? That is the first part of my lecture. Was
very pathetic.
Pathetic. Pathetic. Now, like where we are. Now we have to only brood over this particular problematic. No, you are gone.
That is what
you are in the total world of your own dark house.
They are not in touch with reality.
They are not in touch with the reality. Therefore, that is what my conclusion. Are we doing right? Are we honoring our tradition? Are we justified in our approach to do the way we are doing?
Yes. Something from what Swami said. Sir, there you said that the schools are not open to the heterodox schools inviting.
No, that is what happened is, this tradition of sadhus. They are brought up in such titiksha, this, that, all the things. Okay, he is asking some questions, let him be alright, I don't want to answer. I don't want to read Buddhism. What is there in Buddhism? She is dismissing somebody without knowing what he says. Has been going on in Indian tradition, which was one of the major reasons. I can tell you, hundreds of this. See, most of the literature in Advaita Vedanta in the later period was written by sadhus.
Yes.
And Vachaspati Mishra is not being quoted by Vivarana tradition even sadhus. Such a big authoritative Sarvatantra Swatantra is not quoted by sadhus. Why? It is because he was so that type of animosity towards their own.
Tell me why. Why he was not quoted?
Because he was a married man. He is a married man.
Because
he was a married man. He was sadhu.
Again, if I can tell, incorporate Vipasha also says, दिमाग पेट के ऊपर है नीचे नहीं. That is the answer.
That is the answer. So they don't properly perceive the whole tradition. They don't have. So this is the question about Vachaspati Mishra within the Advaita tradition, which is the only system which is alive. Which is the only system alive. And what to talk about other systems? They will say, Jaina, what is the point in reading that? And Jaina will say that we don't want to read that.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Jaina receives every day that where the whole governmental content dies.
Which texts are also restricted within the orthodox.
What is the Jaina? The whole Vedic system must collapse. That is the basic proposition on which they.
In the Tarka Sabhas, which you know about the Tarka Sabhas, that's why I'm not repeating. So we sometimes see that Shastris like Mani Shastri and others are there, Jaina scholars are there. But are you pointing out that in modern context that Western scholars are not invited and that is closing Indian philosophy?
No. I'm not telling that. I'm just telling, putting things properly, first part, putting it where we are.
That situation is clear.
Now, as we all know, how do we learn Indian philosophy? Only by, there are Western books where there is no reference to all your Indian people.
Yes, totally.
Totally. Radha Krishna is not referred. As though it started from Jenner and ended with Alexis Sanderson. That is how the Western philosophy is done. Why? Because we could not take our debates further. Now see, analytical school or any school to that matter in the West is a rational school based on certain social phenomenon, and we could not look at ourselves in ourselves, our philosophy. That is why the distance is too big. We have lost track of the roads are closed on the road. Unless we write something and keep it for the posterity, maybe that, see, the tradition has lived for the last 5,000 years. So I don't think it will die down. The two people can bring up. See, when Shankaracharya, the whole tradition of the Shankara revived 6 systems. Somebody was telling that Tantra, he was feeling. That is not how it was. Shankara did not feel anything. Shankara revived all the systems. Only thing he said was, try to see that what you are doing is necessary but not sufficient. There is something. What you are doing is necessary. Okay, you do your Kaula, you do your Naku, Isha or Pasupata or Raurava or whatever, but this is not sufficient. You have to see the play of the ultimate here, play of the consciousness here. That is what I was telling. Everywhere he has shown. That only, like you can do anything. That is how the world is. So therefore there is a Vidya and Paravidya and Aparavidya. The whole question.
I haven't finished. So when we are saying if one pramana is sufficient, one pramana, there is no need for the second pramana.
That is pramana.
But then we are coming to Amar Menjintala systems of the pramana. So we have to see Pratyaksha doesn't work, Anumana doesn't work, Arthapati doesn't work, Upamana doesn't work, Abhava doesn't work. That is why this external pramana of the pramana. Sita has been part. So when you go to questioning ability to nahi, or if the chain would a weakest link type. Say it is instead of break question.
No, it is because
there is a question who says that Shabda is the pramana. Then we go back, we arrive at Kaukumara Vata, plus that is the weakest link.
We don't actually arrive at the Kumarila Vata.
Somebody says pramana, they are only the attack. Believe me, this a Christian doesn't attack, a Muslim doesn't attack. These very people, not to put you down, they really challenge.
See, that challenge. That challenge, if it comes in a very surprise way, somebody can answer.
But both entry
that doesn't come in a way properly put up. Like you don't know how to frame your question, I do not know how to answer your question. That is why the indifference. And indifference is don't read anything, don't read anything. But that does not solve the problem. The problem can be solved only by the words. The word problem can be solved only by the words.
When our Mahatmas are going to wake up,
that is a different story.
That
is why I am telling that Shabda is not also pramana according to, like if you don't take pramana, still you can have a prameya. See, this chair does not have a word called chair. Still it can. Brahmajnana does not need Brahmajnana word for coming.
You mean without accepting Shruti as pramana, that can be established?
Just a minute. This chair, does it need a name called chair?
Vastutantra.
Brahma is Vastutantra. It is not necessary that you should have all the Vedas other than Pramana. A person who knows it, he does not need it. If he wants to know it, he needs it. Jigyasa, therefore, is such a great word in our tradition. Jigyasa, it is a hermeneutical necessity. Necessity. It is a hermeneutical necessity. Let me put it. That is how the hermeneutical necessity is lost for us. That is why there is no participation. That is why there is no participation. Yeah. Come.
Philosophy and then the developed system, okay? Then what is the definition of moksha in all the six? It is not same. Moksha for Mimamsa is going to heaven. Moksha for Nyaya is Atyantika Dukha Nivritti. Then like that, ଆପଣ ଧର କହିବେ ସୃଷ୍ଟି କ୍ରମଟା କଣ? ଏମାନେ କଣ କହୁଛନ୍ତି? ସେମାନେ ସାଂଖ୍ୟ କହୁଛି ପ୍ରଧାନ ଇଏ ବୋଲି। then ବୈଶେଷିକ କହୁଛି ଯେ that is ଆମେ କହୁଛୁ ଅଭିନ୍ନ ନିମିତ୍ତ ଉପାଦାନ କାରଣ, but ସେମାନେ କହୁଛନ୍ତି କଣ? ଯେ God ହଉଛନ୍ତି ନିମିତ୍ତ କାରଣ, ଉପାଦାନ କାରଣ is something else. ବୈଶେଷିକ କହୁଛି। It is not God sitting in heaven that he is there and he will bring something else and he so kamayata saha bhavat. There is no second thing.
That is here. That is abhinna nimitta upadana.
Abhinna nimitta. Definition of moksha is not the same.
In other false schools.
Absolutely. Plus,
I brought moksha.
What they say Nibbana is not our moksha. And the thing that one Prataksha Anumadre, if Buddhist can arrive at Nibbana without Shruti Pramana, then something becomes redundant. That is the main thing Sureshwara talks in his Godabarisha.
Main thing is Shankara does not bother about it. Shankara has not bothered about Sunyavadi and Siya.
That time Sunyavadi, na? That time Sunyavadi started at 1st century. Oh yeah, okay.
Shankara talks about Sunyavada, na?
Yes, after.
Vijnanavada and Bharyarthavada, Sunyavada, Smitayam, Shankara. So Shankara knew about it, but he didn't bother. Sureshwara comes.
Not next. What about concerned laguଛି because ମୁଁ ଭାଇ ମାନଙ୍କୁ ଗଣନା ଦେଖୁଛି ଏ ଯଦି ତମେ ତତ୍ତ୍ୱ କଥା ସାରିଦେଲେ ଆଉ ସୋମବାର ମଙ୍ଗଳବାର ଯେ ଦୀକ୍ଷା ଆସିବ
That's right.
I have arrived.
Yeah. That is not how it is. But that is why there is no continuity, no participation.
Because stuff is not there.
There is no stuff. That is the teacher's fault.